Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you.
And peace be upon you as well.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this really profound expectation of precision. It's almost like engineering, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very clinical.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, you go into the clinic, and the x-ray shows that jagged, undeniable white line, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, there it is.
Right. Broken or not broken, it's entirely binary, clean.
Yeah, and in a weird way, even if the news is bad, that clarity is, it's comforting. We really like things to be visible. We like our problems to be neatly categorized and just, contained within the limits of human understanding.
Because we crave the empirical. I mean, if we can see it, we can manage it. If it's on a screen, we can create a treatment plan for it and fix it.
Right. But then you step into the world of spiritual reality, and suddenly that x-ray machine isn't pointing at your bones anymore.
No, it is definitely not. It's pointing at the very fabric of the universe, and even more terrifyingly, it's zooming in on your absolute smallest, most hidden intentions. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape of the human soul that is profound, terrifying, and honestly, ultimately, deeply liberating.
It really is a complete paradigm shift.
So, today we are setting out to unpack Surah Az-Zalzalah. That's chapter 99 of the Quran, known as the earthquake. And our mission for you on this deep dive is to go verse by verse through this short 8-verse sequence.
It's an incredible journey.
It really is. It starts with the macrocosmic destruction of the entire universe, and it zooms all the way down to the microcosmic weighing of a single, solitary atom. And we're going to synthesize classical scholarship with some deeply human, modern takeaways for your everyday life.
And, to really grasp the sheer weight of what we're looking at, we have to look at how it's been weighed historically, because it's arguably one of the most conceptually dense passages in the entire Islamic corpus.
Yeah, I've heard there's a famous prophetic tradition about this specific chapter, right?
Yes, there is. There's a well-known tradition that equates the thematic weight of this tiny 8-verse chapter to literally half of the Quran.
Okay, wait, I really need to stop and process that. 8 verses. I mean, you could read it in, less than a minute?
Easily less than a minute, yeah.
So how does that math work?
Yep.
How does a single minute of recitation equal half of a massive, comprehensive religious text? It's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
It is, but it comes down to understanding the Quran's foundational thematic binary. Like if you take a step back and look at the entirety of the Quranic message, it fundamentally splits into 2 broad categories of human existence.
Okay, so what's the first half?
The first half is basically the legislation of the temporal world, this fleeting world we occupy right now.
Right, the day-to-day stuff.
Exactly. It includes the theology of monotheism, the ethics of how to treat your parents, how to conduct business, jurisprudence, marriage, charity. It's the mechanics of living a functional moral life today.
So it's the present tense, like the what do I do on a Tuesday afternoon part of religion.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. Now, the second half of the Quran's overarching theme is the reality of the hereafter, the unseen.
The big picture stuff.
Yeah, the resurrection, the day of judgment, the ultimate consequences of everything we did on those Tuesday afternoons. And Surah Az-Zalzalah is considered to flawlessly distill that entire second half into one concentrated, overwhelming metaphysical intervention.
Wow. So it just strips away all the daily rules and just hits you with the ultimate reality.
Exactly. It leaves out the jurisprudence and the daily regulations and delivers the pure, unadulterated reality of ultimate accountability. It really is the definitive summary of the eschatological framework.
It's the ultimate wake-up call, really. But before we get into the actual mechanics of this earthquake, I want to look at the history of how these words actually entered the world, the historiographical context.
Well, this is a fascinating area.
Because there is a massive fracture, right? A real debate among classical scholars about the origins of this chapter. It centers around what's called Asbab al-Nuzul, or the occasions of revelation, basically the context of what was happening in the society when these verses were sent down.
Right, and the classical landscape is totally divided on whether it is Makki, meaning revealed early on in Mecca, or Madani, revealed years later in Medina.
Which is wild to me. The dichotomy is fascinating because it fundamentally shifts who we assume the target audience is. Let's explore the Makki argument first. Where does that come from?
Well, this view relies heavily on stylometry. So that's the linguistic style, the cadence, the actual rhythm of the text itself. Scholars who analyze the literary structure, like Sayyid Qutb, for example, strongly favor this Meccan origin.
Because of how it sounds.
Exactly. The chapter utilizes extremely short, abrupt, highly rhythmic verses. And that intense phonetic quality is a major hallmark of early Meccan revelations. They were quite literally designed to shock the listener.
And, I mean, think about who those listeners were. The early Muslims in Mecca were dealing with the Quraysh, the ruling aristocratic tribe. And these were people who vehemently denied the possibility of an afterlife.
They were absolute materialists.
Right. Their philosophy was basically, once you die, your bones turn to dust, and that's the end of the story. There's nothing else.
Right, so you have this exclusive, intense focus on the physical destruction of the earth and the literal resurrection of bodies. It was designed to deliver what Quedbab called a violent shake to the drowsy hearts of the Quraysh.
A violent shake. I like that. It was like a psychological battering ram meant to shatter their idolatrous, wealthy complacency.
It was a full-on intervention against absolute denial. But then you pivot to the Madani argument, and this is supported by heavyweights of classical history,
Like who?
like Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir. They point to specific historical reports suggesting these verses, particularly the ending verses about weighing an atom's worth of good and evil, were actually revealed much later in Medina.
Which is a completely different world. I mean, in Medina, you aren't talking to hostile, arrogant idolaters anymore. You are talking to a community of dedicated, practicing believers.
Exactly, and the psychological context in Medina was vastly different. The historical reports indicate that some of the companions, the practicing believers, were falling into a very specific kind of spiritual trap.
What kind of trap? Like hypocrisy?
No, more like a normalization of minor things. They were beginning to belittle minor actions. So they felt that giving a tiny amount of charity, perhaps just a handful of dates to someone starving, wasn't substantial enough to earn divine reward.
Ah, I see. Like, it wasn't a grand gesture, so why even bother?
Right, and conversely, they were dismissing minor sins as inconsequential because they weren't explicitly major transgressions. It wasn't murder, theft, or treason, so they thought it's fine.
They were losing sight of the micro-morality.
Precisely. They were losing that granular focus.
But wait, if the greatest scholars in history can't even agree on when it was revealed or who it was specifically talking to, like an arrogant billionaire materialist in Mecca or a humble practicing guy in Medina who just didn't think his tiny donation mattered, doesn't that fundamentally change how we're supposed to engage with the text?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like those are two entirely different conversations.
It seems that way on the surface, absolutely.
Yeah.
But this historical ambiguity actually demonstrates a much broader, highly intentional theological phenomenon. It shows the universal applicability of the divine message.
How so?
Well, the reality is that human psychology suffers from different diseases at different stages of life. Sometimes a person suffers from the Meccan disease, which is absolute materialistic arrogance, a total denial that they will ever be held accountable.
Right. And then other times,
Other times, a person suffers from the Medina disease spiritual apathy, the slow erosion of standards where they start thinking the little things just don't matter anymore.
so it's the exact same medicine, but it attacks two completely different spiritual pathogens. That's amazing.
Exactly. The theological reality of the earthquake doesn't mutate based on the audience. The absolute truth of accountability applies equally to the tyrant who thinks he's a god, and the devout worshiper who thinks a minor lie on a tax form doesn't matter.
That makes total sense. So to understand how that medicine actually works, we have to start where the text starts, which is the physical environment. The first two verses outline this massive macrocosmic convulsion.
Right, let's look at verse 1.
Verse 1 reads, "When the earth is shaken with its final earthquake." In Arabic, that's ita zulzulatil ardu zilzalaha. And the linguistic architecture here is just incredible. The whole concept hinges on that root word ZLZL.
Yeah, the Arabic language is fundamentally built on root letters. Most words stem from a trilateral root 3 letters, but here we have a quadriliteral root 4 letters.
Zalam, zalam.
Exactly. And this structural anomaly is meticulously designed to instill awe. The repetition of the letters themselves signifies a violent, repetitive, and continuous physical shaking.
The phonetics literally mimic the physical shuddering of the ground. Zilzal. It vibrates in the mouth of the reciter.
It really does. You can feel the rumbling in the pronunciation.
But there is a tiny, incredibly specific grammatical detail at the very end of that word that completely redefines the scale of this event. It's the possessive pronoun, zilzalha. It's earthquake.
That possessive pronoun is analytically crucial. Classical exegetes emphasize that this is not an ordinary localized seismic event. We aren't talking about tectonic plates shifting along a fault line causing a 7.0 on the Richter scale in one specific hemisphere.
Right, it says it's earthquake.
Which signifies the ultimate, unparalleled convulsion that is uniquely proportioned and universally applied to the Earth's massive planetary sphere.
So it is the bespoke earthquake. It is the single catastrophic event that the planet was pre-programmed to experience from the absolute moment of its creation.
Perfectly said. It's not a random natural disaster. It is a scheduled detonation.
And to clarify the timeline of this event, classical commentators generally place this physical shaking not at the initial end of the world, but at the initiation of the resurrection.
Right. Is the precursor to humanity waking up. The Sunni consensus links this to the second blowing of the trumpet.
Which leads seamlessly into the consequence of that continuous shaking in verse 2. And the earth discharges its burdens. Wa akhajatil ardu athqala. The earth throws out its burdens.
Yeah, the word athqal literally translates to heavy loads or burdens. And classical interpretations provide three very distinct, profound layers to what these burdens actually are.
The first interpretation is honestly the most visceral. The majority of classical scholars, including Ibn Kathir and Al-Tabari, say the burdens are the dead.
Right, the earth will physically vomit out the bodies of the deceased.
Think about the sheer volume of that. From the very first generation of early humanity, stretching all the way to the absolute last person to ever die. Billions upon billions of bodies that the earth has been quietly absorbing and carrying. The earth violently expels them all at once, reconstructing them for judgment.
It is a terrifying, inescapable visual of absolute human equality. But then the second interpretation adds a deep economic and moral dimension. Scholars like Al-Qurtubi suggest the burdens are the Earth's hidden treasures.
Oh, like gold and silver.
Exactly. The Earth will expel all its hidden gold, silver, oil, and precious resources, all the commodities that drove human conflict.
There is an authentic prophetic tradition that illustrates this with such haunting clarity. The Prophet Muhammad stated that the earth will throw out the pieces of its liver in the form of massive columns of gold and silver.
And the imagery of how resurrected humans react to this wealth is just incredible.
Yeah, the tradition says a murderer will walk past these massive pillars of gold and say, "This is what I killed for." A thief will walk by, look at the boundless wealth, and say, "This is what I got my hand cut off for."
And someone who ruthlessly severed ties with their family over an inheritance dispute will say, "This is what I abandoned my own blood for."
It represents the ultimate devastating devaluation of worldly currency. Throughout history, human beings have destroyed their own souls, waged wars, and betrayed their loved ones to extract these metals and resources from the dirt.
And on this day, the earth will literally vomit it all back up, throwing it at their feet. They will stare at unimaginably massive piles of the exact wealth they worshipped, and they will realize it won't buy them a single microsecond of salvation. It is entirely, utterly worthless.
It's the ultimate realization of a wasted life. But, there's a third interpretation of these burdens that comes from modern linguistic analysis, particularly from scholars like Amin Hassan Islahi.
Yes, his perspective is so relevant today.
He suggests that the burdens the earth is carrying are the suppressed truths, the hidden crimes, the buried secrets that the physical environment has quietly absorbed throughout human history.
This is where the macrocosmic event becomes deeply, deeply personal.
Yeah.
We treat the physical realm as a passive sponge, right? Like a temporary vault.
Yeah, we assume that what we bury in the dirt or hide behind closed doors stays buried.
But it doesn't.
Think about a massive corporation secretly dumping toxic waste into a river in the dead of night. They cover it up. They falsify the environmental reports. They bribe the inspectors.
Happens all the time.
Right. They completely escape human law, human courts, human justice. They walk away with their profits, and they think they got away with it.
But this verse establishes that the physical universe has a perfect retentive memory. It might take centuries, but eventually the Earth itself is going to regurgitate that toxic waste. It will surrender its contents, both physical and moral.
It's like a black box in an airplane. When the plane goes down, everything is destroyed, but that black box survives and plays back every single word spoken in the cockpit. The Earth is the black box of human history.
That is a very apt analogy. The Earth is not just a stage upon which we act, it is a recording medium. And this violent macrocosmic collapse of the environment forces a direct psychological rupture in the human being.
Right, because the physical environment completely breaks down, which immediately shatters human psychology. And this is captured in verse 3. And man says, "What is wrong with it? Wakwalin Sanumalaha?
So we zoom in from the collapsing planet directly into the mind of a single human being.
It is a single, terrified existential utterance. What is wrong with it?
And exegetes note that man here refers to all of humanity collectively. Imagine the sensory overload of that moment. You wake up, resurrected, you come to your senses, and you witness the absolute violent collapse of the natural laws you trusted implicitly your entire life.
Gravity is failing.
Yes, gravity is gone. The stability of the ground is gone. The sun has changed. Everything you relied upon for security is disintegrating.
The scholar My Duty points out that the very first impression of resurrected humans will be sheer, paralyzing confusion. You are looking around completely bewildered before the horrifying realization finally clicks into place.
That this is it.
Exactly. This is the promised resurrection day. The prophets weren't lying, the ancient books weren't myths, the warnings weren't just folklore. It is happening right now, to you.
The psychological weight of that realization is staggering. To contextualize this, classical spirituality introduces a profound concept from the scholar Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. In his analysis of the spiritual journey, he discusses something called the station of fear, maqam al-khawf.
Okay. What does that mean exactly?
Ibn Qayyim asserts that true functional faith requires an active, cognitive anticipation of this exact moment of rupture. The sheer terror expressed in that phrase, "what is wrong with it," is the specific terror of a soul that lived in worldly heedlessness.
So someone who just didn't care.
Right? A soul that was entirely comfortable in the temporary world and is now suddenly and violently awakened to the reality of the unseen.
But hold on, living in constant fear of the apocalypse sounds paralyzing. I mean, we live in an era of unprecedented modern anxiety. We have climate anxiety, economic anxiety, social anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. It's overwhelming.
If I add constant anticipation of the violent end of the physical world to my plate, how does that actually help me live a good, productive, healthy life today? It sounds like a recipe for a permanent panic attack. How is this not just, well, theological trauma?
That is a very natural and necessary reaction to this concept. If fear is misunderstood, it absolutely becomes paralyzing. But Ibn Qayyim makes a crucial surgical distinction here. He describes a praiseworthy fear.
Praiseworthy fear.
Yes, he is not advocating for a generalized neurotic anxiety that traps you in your bed every morning. Praiseworthy fear is a highly functional, protective psychological mechanism. It is a fear that actively creates boundaries.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? Like, give me an example.
Think of it like a fire drill in a large building. The purpose of a fire drill is not to keep the employees in a constant state of hyperventilating terror about burning to death.
Right, that would ruin productivity and just destroy their mental health.
Exactly. The purpose of the drill is anticipatory consciousness. You practice the route, you know where the exits are, you respect the fire hazards. Because you have a healthy, functional fear of fire, you don't play with matches in the office, and you know exactly what to do if the alarm sounds.
You are prepared, not paralyzed?
Right. You are prepared.
That makes total sense. The fear dictates a set of healthy daily behaviors.
Exactly. Waiting until the physical world actually collapses to finally ask what is happening represents the ultimate spiritual failure. You ignored the fire drills your whole life.
Wow, yeah.
The entire point of Surah Az-Zalzalah is that the believer is tasked with asking those profound existential questions now, today, during our current periods of deceptive stability. You ask the big questions while the ground is still stable, so you are not struck by paralyzing ignorant shock when the inevitable occurs.
So humanity is standing there, resurrected, in total shock, asking the earth, what is wrong with it? And the Surah immediately answers that question in the next phase. The earth transitions from being a passive stage to an active participant.
Right, this happens in verses 4 and 5.
That day, it will report its news, because your Lord has commanded or inspired it.
This represents a breathtaking ontological paradigm shift. The earth is no longer an inanimate object. The dirt, the rocks, the floorboards, they become articulate, animate witnesses.
It literally finds its voice. Classical exegetes narrate a foundational prophetic tradition from Abu Huraira to explain exactly what this means. The Prophet Muhammad recited this exact verse, "That day it will report its news." And he turned to his companions and asked, "Do you know what its news is?"
And out of respect, they deferred to Allah and his messenger.
Right, and the Prophet explained, "Verily, the news is that it will bear witness against every male and female servant for what they did on its surface. It will say, he did this and this on such and such a day. Those are its news."
The ground you are standing on right now is going to talk. Let that sink in. Sayyid Qurbayb has an incredible insight on the phrase, Ahwallaha, which means inspired it or commanded it.
What does he say?
He points out that the Earth's current silence, the fact that the floor beneath us isn't currently announcing every sin we commit in real time, is a deliberate, temporary divine mercy.
Really? How so?
It is a profound observation of the mechanics of free will. The Earth is fundamentally obedient to its creator, right? It possesses the capacity to witness right now. But its silence is specifically designed to allow humans the freedom of choice.
Oh, I see. Because if the floor screamed every time you lied...
You wouldn't have free will. You would be forced into compliance by immediate, overwhelming physical confirmation. The delay in consequences is what makes moral choice possible. But its speech on the Day of Judgment is the final, inescapable execution of divine justice.
That is heavy. And Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, the great philosopher, he adds another layer to this. He notes that granting speech to dirt proves that articulation, the ability to speak and convey complex thought, is not just some biological evolutionary trait of having vocal cords and a larynx.
Exactly. It is a direct divine grant. The creator of the vocal cord can easily make a stone speak.
Which brings us to the concept of absolute accountability, or muhasaba, as analyzed by Ibn Taymiyyah. He reinforces that divine justice leaves absolutely zero margin for error, zero loopholes, and zero plausible deniability.
Which is so different from our world. Think about human legal systems. They are incredibly flawed and fragile.
Yeah, we need circumstantial evidence. We rely on human memory, which, degrades over time.
Right. We need character witnesses. We hire expensive defense attorneys to find procedural technicalities to get evidence thrown out.
But by animating the physical earth, the divine bypasses all of those human flaws. There is no need for a secondary witness, a prosecutor, or a jury when the very ground upon which the act was committed serves simultaneously as the prosecution and the definitive evidence.
It's unavoidable.
It's like thinking you're in incognito mode on your browser. You clear your history, you think you are totally untraceable. But your internet service provider is still logging every single keystroke.
That's a great way to think about it.
Except here, the ISP is the physical floorboards of your living room. Scholars refer to this as spatial morality, the idea that your physical actions leave a permanent spiritual imprint on your environment. The earth remembers what our brains conveniently forget.
And this completely demolishes the psychological comfort of secrecy.
Yeah.
Because we constantly alter our moral compass based on surveillance.
We all do it. You drive differently when you see a police car. You work differently when your boss walks past your desk. You might speak differently to your spouse if you know guests are in the next room. We modulate our ethics based on human observation.
But if you internalize this verse, you realize the physical space itself is a permanent recording device calibrated by the divine. A university student might think they are cheating on an exam in an entirely empty room. No proctors, no security cameras.
But they aren't alone.
No, they aren't. The desk they are writing on, the chair they are sitting in, the walls surrounding them, they are all active observers waiting to testify.
It forces you to cultivate the exact same moral integrity in a crowded, brightly lit public plaza as you do in a locked, isolated room at 2 a.m., because the room is watching. And once the earth gives this undeniable spatial testimony, humanity must face the consequences.
Which triggers the Great Segregation.
Right. Verse 6. That day the people will depart separated into categories to be shown the consequences of their deeds. The
Arabic word ashtatan is fascinating. It means separated, scattered, divided into diverse, distinct groups. This is the precise moment where every single worldly marker we use to define ourselves and shield ourselves completely dissolves.
Al-Tabari and Al-Qurtubi explain that humanity will be rigidly divided, but not by the artificial constructs that define our worldly hierarchies. In this life, we organize our identities around incredibly fragile things.
Things like race, nationality, socioeconomic status.
Corporate titles, tribal affiliations, political parties.
And we use those groups as shields. We hide our individual flaws behind collective power. I'm a vice president at this massive conglomerate. I belong to this wealthy, influential family. I am a citizen of this superpower nation.
But on that day, those markers are rendered mathematically null and void. The VP badge means nothing. The passport means nothing. People are segregated purely on their spiritual allegiances and their individualized moral records. It becomes a stark binary division.
The people of monotheism versus the people of polytheism. The people bound for paradise versus the people bound for the hellfire.
And the mechanism by which this judgment is delivered is terrifying in its transparency. Contemporary scholars like Numan Ali Khan draw intense attention to the specific Arabic grammar used in the second half of the verse. It's a passive verb, liyura.
To be shown.
Yeah, it doesn't say they will be told about their deeds. A cosmic judge isn't just going to read a list of infractions off a clipboard. They will be visually, viscerally shown them.
It is a cinematic, undeniable presentation of your entire life's reality.
Think about our modern obsession with PR public relations. We live in an era of curated reality. Social media filters, carefully edited profiles, image consultants. We spend vast amounts of emotional energy managing how people perceive us.
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting.
And when we make a mistake, we control the narrative. We
Yeah.
put out a press release or an apology video to explain away our flaws and justify our actions. We are the directors of our own propaganda.
But on this day, the filters drop completely.
Yeah.
There is no PR team.
I-
There is no spin room. There is no opportunity to interject and say, well, what I actually meant was,
Right. There is no room for argument or denial when you are forced to watch your own actions unfold in high-definition, unedited reality before your own eyes. It's the terrifying reality of solitary, stripped accountability.
you don't get to bring your entourage. You don't get a defense lawyer to cross-examine the earth. It's just you, entirely alone, watching the playback of the moments you thought no one saw.
This stark visualization forces a person to cultivate an individualized, authentic relationship with the divine today, because collective identity and public perception offer absolute zero salvation in the hereafter.
It really reframes everything.
So if we are going to be shown every single deed, what is the exact metric used for this review? How granular does this audit get? Do they only show the big stuff, like the felonies and the major donations?
No, not at all. The Surah answers this by zooming all the way in, shifting from the macro destruction of the planet to the absolute microcosmic level of human action.
This is verses 7 and 8. So whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it. Faman yama mithkola daratin kairan yara. And whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. Waman yaman mithkola daratin sharan yara.
These two verses are the theological zenith of the chapter. They summarize the absolute, terrifying, and beautiful perfection of divine justice. The Arabic term is mithqala dara.
And classical commentators really struggled with how to best translate this concept to capture its absolute minuteness for a pre-modern audience. Early scholars often translated it as the weight of a tiny red ant.
Right. And others said it was the weight of a single microscopic speck of dust you only see when it floats through a shaft of sunlight in a dark room.
Which is a brilliant visual. I can picture that perfectly. And in modern scientific context, it translates seamlessly to the weight of an atom, the fundamental, indivisible particle of matter.
It is the ultimate law of moral conservation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in physics, energy is never lost. It just transfers. In this spiritual framework, moral energy is never lost. Every single ounce of intent you put into the universe, no matter how microscopic, is conserved, recorded, and presented back to you.
And this brings in the incredible commentary of the classical scholar Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali.
Yes, Ibn Rajab provides an exhaustive analysis of these specific verses. He inextricably links this microscopic accountability to the concept of ikhlas, which is the absolute purification of internal intentions.
Because if deeds are going to be weighed at the subatomic level, then the physical action itself isn't what's heavy. The internal motivation, the why behind what you did, becomes the actual weight.
Precisely. Let's look at a grand worldly gesture. Suppose someone donates $10 million and builds a massive hospital wing with their name plastered on the front. Physically, in the temporal world, that is a massive deed.
Everyone praises them.
Exactly. But if their internal intention was purely for public relations, to win an election, or just to massage their own ego, on the divine scales, that $10 million is entirely hollow. It has no spiritual density. It weighs absolutely nothing.
Wow. But on the flip side, a microscopic act of hidden kindness, fueled by pure, unadulterated devotion to Allah, is monumentally heavy. There's a beautiful story of a janitor during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. He simply cleaned the mosque every single night.
Quietly, meticulously sweeping the dust.
Yeah, unseen by the elite of society. No fame, no recognition, no plaques. But when he passed away, the Prophet actually noticed his absence, asked where he was, and went out to pray over his grave specifically. The divine saw that quiet, atomic-level dedication.
It's so beautiful, and Ibn Rajab cites a prophetic tradition that reinforces this concept of daily micro-accountability. The Prophet taught that a person's body owes a tax of charity for every single joint, every single day the sun rises.
Which mathematically sounds impossible and overwhelming. Paying charity for every joint in your body daily.
Right. But he immediately alleviated that burden by explaining that this charity can be fulfilled through the simplest atomic acts. Uttering a kind word, a fleeting, genuine smile at a stranger, removing a harmful object like a branch or a rock from the road, helping someone lift their luggage onto an animal or into their car.
These are the atoms of good.
These are things we do without even registering them.
Let's add some modern examples for you listening, because this is where the theology meets real life. Good atoms. A teenager quietly leaving a larger tip for a visibly exhausted waitress. Suppressing a momentary urge of blinding road rage when someone cuts you off, simply out of a desire for peace.
Defending a coworker who isn't in the room when people start gossiping about them.
Yes. Those are the specks of dust in the sunbeam that will tip the scales.
But conversely, we must look at the atoms of evil with the exact same magnifying glass. Ibn Kathir and Al-Tabari emphasize a terrifying concept derived from these verses, the danger of muhakarat al-dunub.
The belittling of minor sins.
Yes. The danger of thinking, oh, it's just a small thing, it doesn't really matter, it's just a white lie, it's just a few dollars, it's just one look.
That psychological rationalization is incredibly dangerous. The Prophet Muhammad explicitly warned against viewing minor sins as inconsequential. He used a brilliant, terrifying analogy. He compared the accumulation of minor sins to a group of travelers who settle in a barren, desolate land.
They need to cook their food, but there are no large trees. So the leader tells everyone to spread out and find whatever they can. Each traveler goes out and gathers a single, small, seemingly insignificant twig.
Just one little dried twig. By itself, you can't do anything with it. You can't boil water with one twig.
Right, it seems totally harmless. But eventually, they all return to camp and throw these individual twigs into a single pile, and they amass enough wood to kindle a massive, raging fire that is large enough to consume everything.
It perfectly maps onto the neuroscience of habituation. When you commit a minor infraction for the first time, your brain registers a spike of guilt. But if you keep doing it, if you keep collecting that specific twig, your brain becomes habituated. It stops firing the guilt signal. You become desensitized.
And that neurological desensitization mirrors the theological warning from Ibn Taymiyyah. He says that the constant accumulation of minor sins without continuous repentance literally hardens the spiritual heart. It calcifies it.
Once the heart is hardened to the minor sins, the major sins become easily accessible. The fire is already built, it just needs a breeze.
What are the modern twigs, though?
Yeah, what are the atoms of evil we collect every day? It's leaving a toxic, anonymous comment on a YouTube video and just closing your laptop, completely forgetting the human being on the other end who will read it. It's shortchanging a customer by a few pennies. It's wasting an hour doom scrolling when you promise to spend time with your kids.
It seems like nothing in the moment.
But verse 8 guarantees. Whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. You will see those exact pennies and that exact toxic comment placed upon the scale.
The precision of the atom's weight ensures that humans cannot mathematically game the system. You cannot calculate your salvation. You can't say, well, I donated $50,000 to the orphanage, so I have a license to verbally abuse my employees for the next decade.
The scales don't work like that.
No, they don't. You must rely entirely on the overarching mercy of Allah, while simultaneously striving for meticulous, obsessive obedience in the micro moments.
And that profound realization brings us to the synthesis of this entire deep dive, wrapping up the psychological and practical lessons from this chapter. Historically, scholars summarize the impact of this surah using what is known as the Faqih paradigm.
It's a renowned historical narrative, frequently cited in the classical tafsir literature regarding Surah Az-Zalzalah. A Bedouin Sow, a rugged desert nomad, someone disconnected from the academic and political life of the city, approached the Prophet Muhammad seeking to learn the Quran. He wanted guidance. The Prophet recited to him just these final two verses, verses 7 and 8, the atom's weight of good and the atom's weight of evil.
And the Bedouin's reaction is legendary.
Upon hearing just those two sentences, the Bedouin held up his hand, declared them entirely sufficient for his life's guidance, and he departed. He literally turned around and walked back into the desert.
He heard the equivalent of two sentences of scripture, internalized the absolute totality of their meaning, and said, "Got it, I don't need anything else."
And the Prophet Muhammad's reaction to this man leaving is the crux of the lesson. He remarked that this Bedouin had become a faqih, a person of profound, internalized, comprehensive understanding.
This is such a devastating critique of how we approach knowledge today. We live in an age of absolute information gluttony. We consume endless deep dives. We read endless articles. We debate hyper-specific theology on social media for hours.
We amass mountains of religious and philosophical data. But the goal of revelation isn't hoarding data.
The ultimate goal is the internalization of truth. The Bedouin understood that you do not need to memorize multi-volume encyclopedias of complex jurisprudence to achieve righteousness if you truly, deeply, at your core, internalize the reality that every single atom of your behavior is currently being scrutinized.
This surah shifts the metric of religious success away from academic retention and places it squarely on achieving spiritual hyper-awareness in how you act when you think no one is looking.
And in achieving that awareness, the chapter perfectly balances our understanding of the Creator. Scholars talk about the equilibrium of Allah's attributes within these 8 verses. It gives us a flawlessly balanced theological picture.
It connects the believer to the names and attributes of Allah in a highly practical, experiential manner. First, in the opening verses, we see Allah as Al-Qawwi, the overwhelmingly powerful. This is demonstrated by the absolute ease with which he shatters the planetary structure and reverses natural laws.
Destroying a planet is effortless.
Then we see him as Al-Alim, the all-knowing, demonstrated by his infinite capacity to extract complex, historical testimony from inanimate dirt and stone, and his precise, inescapable knowledge of the subatomic.
And finally, Al-Adl and Al-Hakam, the perfectly just and the ultimate judge. Demonstrated by the flawless subatomic calibration of the final scales, he ensures no soul is wronged by even a fraction of a speck of dust.
By oscillating between the terrifying macro-destruction of the earth and the comforting, precise micro-justice of the atom, the surah perfectly balances the believer's heart between Qaf, which is fear, and Raja, which is hope.
But let me push back on that idea of hope, because I think a lot of people struggle here. When you read this and you focus intensely on the atoms of sin, knowing that every sharp word, every wasted minute, every selfish thought is being recorded and weighed, doesn't it naturally lead to overwhelming despair?
It's common fear, yes.
It's very easy to think, I have billions of bad atoms, the scale is broken, I give up.
It is a common existential fear. But the scholars argue the exact opposite is true. This surah is the ultimate cure for spiritual apathy and despair, because the mathematical promise applies to the good atoms just as strictly and just as permanently as the bad ones.
Oh, wow. It democratizes salvation.
Exactly. You do not need a massive platform, billions of dollars, or geopolitical power to earn divine pleasure. You don't need to cure a disease or change the trajectory of human history. Modern life is comprised of thousands of daily, mundane micro-interactions.
Holding a door, picking up a piece of trash, uttering a silent prayer for an ambulance as it drives by, swallowing a sarcastic comment.
Yes, Surah Az-Zalzalah elevates those seemingly mundane, invisible micro-moments into matters of literal cosmic significance. A hidden, sincere micro-interaction is enough to tip the scales.
It offers boundless, comforting hope for the smallest acts of sincere virtue. It establishes that in the divine ledger, there are no insignificant moments.
Nothing is wasted. Nothing is forgotten.
We've covered the physical destruction, the psychological rupture, the talking earth, and the atomic scales. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to reframe how we look at the physical world around us based on everything we've just discussed.
What do you mean?
Well, we tend to think of the Earth's testimony solely as a threat. The floorboards are waiting to snitch on us. The park bench is waiting to testify about our litter. It creates a paradigm where the physical universe feels like a hostile prosecutor.
It feels adversarial, yeah. Like the world is against you.
Right. But what if we flip that? If the Earth is an articulate, animate participant in the Day of Judgment, then it can also be your greatest advocate.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
You have the ability, starting today, to deliberately populate your physical environment with witnesses for you. When you pray in different rooms of your house, you are literally creating new character witnesses.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
When you walk a different path to work and engage in quiet remembrance, you are enlisting the pavement to speak on your behalf. The Earth isn't just a trap, it is a canvas. You can leave a legacy of a living Earth that will stand up and testify to your goodness.
We spend so much energy curating a record for the public, trying to impress people who will be just as terrified and distracted on that day as we are.
Exactly. This surah demands a radical reorientation. It demands we focus only on the divine ledger and the physical environment that is constantly recording our actual truth.
It changes your relationship with the very ground you walk on.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.